Hi everyone, today is going to be a short one as I'm working on a demo for my upcoming game and using all of my free time for that. So let's get to it. As I mentioned in my previous videos, I've been building software for almost 20 years now, and from startups to freelancing and all the way to Google, and mostly built business apps working across the stack. But on the side, I've kept making small indie games. I managed to publish some of them, make some money from some of them, but most didn't get published or made any money. So why do I keep building games on the side when I could just be focusing 100% on business app development? To me, these are really two different worlds. Each have different skill sets that are being exercised as a software engineer. And a lot of the business apps I've had to build, they were shaped very similarly, where you have some kind of data in a storage system, can be a database, files, or even a third-party data provider. You can build some intermediate API layer to allow consumer to access and modify that content, to read or write the data. You have to often build the consumer side yourself, like web app, mobile app, hardware devices, or other, and also all the associated user interfaces and user flows and critical journeys that this user will take to access that data that will make their app useful. You also have to create and set up infrastructure to make the data flow across the stack so that it ends up in the hands of the user or ends up being written in that storage layer at that point, at the other end. And you often have to also set up infrastructure to process the data, either in real-time analysis or reporting purpose or other kind of data analysis pipelines that you might need to build. And after a while, I think it took around 10 years for me, you realize that a lot of those systems across the stack or across various companies start to look the same. There are variations pertaining to the company that, that's actual business logic, the logic around what the data is, what do you do with that data, what the type and the structure of that data is like. But very often that business logic behind those systems is not really very complex. Okay, I buy something, that's the price of an item, then I have a purchase flow, then I have a registration flow for authentication and stuff like this. So it ends up being very, very samey after a while. And you start to realize that the complexity is not so much in the business logic itself, it's more around how these various distributed systems interact with each other, how you can have also medium to large teams working on those systems at the same time and safely deploy those new products and features to the end users. And you see all of these patterns around continuous integration, continuous delivery, message queuing, caching, and all of those things that you have distributed networks and load balancing and stuff like this around managing this complex backend infrastructure. On the game dev side, I find that I'm exercising and learning skills that I don't get to use very often in my day job. And it's been true for most of my career, including more recently at Google. And game dev in particular, in deep independent game development with a small team of 1 to 3 people, forces you to develop really strong foundations in building a single application. So in business software, you have a usually smaller application powered by a large and complex backend infrastructure. In single apps, specifically games, everything happens inside the app itself. All of these patterns I described above, they have to be crammed and baked into a single binary. Consider the aspects that you need to pay attention to in a game. You have to pay attention to the performance, memory management, assets management. You have very intricate user-triggered flows. You need to build complex data structures to manipulate all of your game system, like a magic element with fire versus ice or lightning versus metal. Inventory management, NPC interactions, AI, music and sound system and queuing of those music and syncing them with the game state. Loading and unloading various parts of your game dynamically, saving and restoring the state of what the user is or the player is doing at this point. A random number generation like loot tables or procedurally generated levels and content. You can load and assets and data from the cloud even, like DLCs or seasonal content. You can open up your game engine to modding via APIs or external scripting systems. You have to, write directly in assembly code or in C code shaders for your GPU to post-process some of that content to make it look nice and add special effects, particle effects, and you have to blend animations of your characters together. And you will spend hours on polishing, every single aspect of your game to make, your drag and drop smoother or your gun firing sound crunchy or the animation sound smooth, look smooth and stuff like this. Of course, as an independent game developer, you also have to deal with the non-programming part, like crowdfunding and generally game financing, financing your studio and your game, sourcing for stuff that you cannot do yourself. So I'm a programmer, I cannot draw, so I have to source for art, music. I also have to handle the community management and the PR for the game, via my Twitter feed or Facebook page when the previous game was released. You have to negotiate publishing contracts, royalties, updating the game regularly, playtesting, and all of those other things. But I find that those last aspects are very similar to what a smaller startup would be like for someone on the startup, because when the startup is very small, you have to wear many hats. You have to do all of these roles yourself, like marketing and communication and negotiating contracts and stuff like this. It's just specialized to game development. But on the engineering side, I really like those two worlds, and I really feel lucky that I'm able to contribute to both at the same time. Uh, I learned a lot on both sides, both game dev and business software development, where I think at the core they share a lot of the foundational knowledge, patterns, and practices. And I often apply what I learn in game dev into my day job, and vice versa. Right? When peers and colleagues really ask me, like, how do I become better engineers, I often tell them, you should consider building a small game. You will have to learn all of these patterns that are very complex in one single app, where it's kind of a safer environment, and you just build an app and you build all your system, put everything together, and you click on the button and things happen and stuff like that. You don't have to set up complex infrastructure on the backend side to make this happen. But you will quickly have to ramp up to all of these foundational knowledge I mentioned above and start building that library of pattern data structure, figuring out complex business logic and interaction. And I personally believe that helps me in my day job on the non-game development side. And yeah, that's usually my advice. If you are looking for a hobby project, build a small game. I don't know what it is. Use procedurally generated content if you want. Actually, try to work on some AI script. It's very interesting to learn all of those things. So yeah, that was my take on game development versus business application development. I hope this was helpful and maybe even inspiring to some of you. If you like that kind of content, don't forget to like, subscribe, all these things. I try to post every 2 weeks. And so thanks all, and see you in the next one.